Welcome back, everybody, to the Long Island Big Book Workshop. My name is Taylor, and I'm an alcoholic.
Hey, Taylor.
Yes. Can we please have a moment of silence, followed by the Serenity Prayer? God,
grant us the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, courage to change the things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
The purpose of this workshop is for AA members to share their experience on 5 topics: surrender, forgive, amend, change, and serve. It is open to anyone interested, but please respect the anonymity of anyone else attending and do not disclose anyone else's attendance without their permission or convey content linked to the identity of the speaker. Some housekeeping items real quick regarding the amenities. Once again, 2 restrooms over there, beverage room back here. We have, I believe at this point, limited water bottles, but there's water dispensers for filtered water throughout. We have coffee, tea, which can be, you can heat up hot water in the microwave. We have soda. We have some light snacks. Depending on your definition of light, and brownies. This session will be ending at about 4:15. In terms of if you wanted to have questions asked to the speakers, please direct your questions to Tim, the gentleman in the blue shirt with the British accent who was just speaking before, who's disappeared. Don't worry. To kick us off, here is a reading for this session on the topic of change. We have emphasized willingness as being indispensable. Are we now ready to let God remove from us all the things which we have admitted are objectionable? Can He now take them all, every one? If we still cling to something we will not let go, we ask God to help us be willing. When ready, we say something like this: My Creator, I am now willing that you should have all of me, good and bad. I pray that you now remove from me every single defect of character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. Grant me strength as I go out from here to do your bidding. Amen. We have now completed step 7, page 76 from Alcoholics Anonymous. So we now have 5 speakers. We have James, Anthony, Bill, Paul, and Corrina. And I now invite you to welcome James, who has come to share on the topic of change.
Thank you. I'm James. I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, James.
I've asked Taylor there just to read out the short passage in the Big Book on steps 6 and 7. So there's very little about it in the Big Book, and as you know, there's much more written about it in the 12 and 12, and I'm going to be making some reference to the 12 and 12 because it's a piece of writing that I've found extremely helpful in relation to these steps. Of course, we start changing as soon as we come into AA. As soon as I put down a drink all those years ago, I started to change. For one thing, I stopped drinking, and that was a pretty massive change. But that's not really the change that I want to talk about. I want to talk about the change that is spoken of in 6 and 7, the readiness to have God remove these defects of character which I've uncovered in the course of my step 4 and 5, and the request that God remove those in step 7. And what I particularly want to address is what's my part in it? Because step 6 says I must be entirely ready to have God remove these defects of character. And step 7 says that I must humbly ask Him to do so. So beyond the readiness and the humbly asking, is there anything else that I have to do? Is there any part that I have to play in this? And that's really what I want to address and just think about with you just for the next few minutes. And I want to tell you a little story. I don't know if Tim's here, because Tim's heard this little story before, but nobody else would have done. But it has the virtue of being true. And it's a story about a holiday that I took a few years ago with my partner. And I booked the holiday, and we had booked to go to Italy. And my partner speaks extremely good Italian. You would practically think he wasn't Italian. And I was anxious about the fact that what was going to happen on this holiday, as has happened many times before, is that there would be conversations going on around me in Italian, not involving me, involving him and involving other people, and not involving me. And I would sit there with a stupid sort of grin on my face, sort of pretending I sort of vaguely understood what was going on, and not having any idea of what was going on. And I thought, I'm not having this. There's something I can do about this. I can actually at least try and learn a bit of Italian. So that was my plan. And it was about 8 weeks before we were due to set off. And I went to the local bookstore, and I went to the language section. And there are a number of courses on Italian. And I found this course by a chap called Michel Thomas. And it was a little box set of CDs, 8 CDs, an hour each. And the strapline on the cover of the CD set was this: Italian complete course. I like the complete. No books, no writing, just confidence in hours. I thought, this is me. This has got my name on it. This is exactly what I want. And so I bought Michel Thomas, and I set off down the road with a spring in my step going home, because at that moment, I was entirely ready to have Michel Thomas remove from me my ignorance of Italian. Now, fast forward 8 weeks. How's my Italian? It's non-existent. It's non-existent. Because I didn't do what was required of me. You see, in order for Michel Thomas, I'm sure Michel Thomas is a very, very good teacher of languages. I'm sure he is. But for it to work, for him to be able to operate in my life, I have to expose myself to him. I have to take him out of the box and put him into the CD player and listen to what he has to say. And if I don't do that, I'm not going to learn Italian. The ignorance is not going to be lifted from me. And that was my problem, you see. My entire readiness lasted all of half an hour. I'm afraid that just doesn't cut it. Okay. Now, for me, step 6 sort of operates in rather a similar way. You know, entirely ready to have God remove these defects of character. It's, you know, when I finished my step 5, and when a lot of people finish their step 5, they have a spring in their step. You often hear people talking about feeling as though a weight has been lifted off their shoulders. And it is a great feeling, and no doubt many of us have felt that feeling. But unless I'm willing to be changed, step 6 and step 7, unless I'm willing to be changed, then that feeling ain't going to last. It didn't last with Michel Thomas. It's not going to last with step 6 and 7. Okay? I've got to maintain the readiness to have God remove these defects of character. It's not a once and for all, it's a forever. Okay? It's a forever. I have got to be forever ready to have God remove these defects of character. And I've got to expose myself to the influence of this higher power. And I've got to do, just as I should have done what Michel Thomas told me. If Michel Thomas said, repeat after me, 1, 2, 3, I should have done it. I never did it. Okay, but exposing myself to the influence of my higher power, if I do what my higher power tells me to do, and my higher power can manifest himself in many ways, as I'm going to illustrate in a minute. If I do what my higher power tells me to do, then lo and behold, these defects of character are at least diminished, if not taken away completely. They are at least diminished. It's a process of cooperation. You know, God cannot work in my life unless I allow him to, unless I turn towards him and allow him to. It doesn't work otherwise. He's given me free will. You know, he said to me, you can turn your back on me if you want, and if you do that, well, there it is. But if you want to turn to me, I'll help you. Okay, that's the way it works. That's the deal. Okay, and the term cooperation is used by Bill in this in step 6 in the 12 and 12, page 66. He says this: if we ask, God will certainly forgive our derelictions, but in no case does he render us white as snow and keep us that way without our cooperation. Okay, that's something we are supposed to be willing to work towards ourselves. He asks only that we try as best we know how to make progress in the building of character. And so he describes step 6 as describing an attitude to take towards what will become a lifetime job. Okay, so this readiness is an attitude to take towards a lifetime job. And there's no point in being ready unless you're willing to do things. You know, I think Paul was sharing yesterday, there's no point in making a decision in step 3 unless you're prepared to go through with some action. Okay? There's no point in being ready in step 6 unless you're prepared to do the stuff that is required to have this change effective, to allow God to work in your life, your higher power to work in your life. Now, I want to give you an illustration, if I may, of just how that worked for me. I had a relapse after 7 years, as some of you who were here yesterday will know. And when I came back into the fellowship, I threw myself into it, and I had a very pragmatic sponsor. And I did a thorough step 4 and 5 with him. And it threw up many, many things, of course, but I just want to pick on 2 of them, of the hundreds. But there are just 2 which sort of, because they illustrate the point. One of them was a resentment towards my roommate at work. I shared a room with a much older man who was sort of my boss. And I had a real difficulty with him because he was very set in his ways. He wasn't interested in trying new things, and I sort of fell out with him and basically didn't communicate with him. Okay, but I still had to go to work every day and sit in the same room as him. All right. So there was a problem. And my sponsor said to me, once we'd looked at this resentment and looked at what was the cause of the resentment, when we got to step 6 and 7, my sponsor said to me, what are you going to do about this? And I said, well, I will pray to have, at the root of it was fear in me. I will pray to have this fear removed from me. He said, well, that's a start, certainly. But he said, may I suggest that when you go into your room tomorrow, you actually talk to him. You talk to him. And you say, good morning, Richard. How's your weekend been? Okay. And offer to make him a cup of coffee. In other words, reopen communications with him. Now, there was God speaking to me through my sponsor, saying, look, come on, the stuff you can do here to have this resentment, this particular fear removed from you. There was another example. One of the things that bugged me, and continues to bug me to an extent, is the fact that I frequently start projects and do not finish them. And the reason for that is because I am a perfectionist. And if I hit a fault in this project, which I find too difficult, I abandon it. Okay, and that happens in many things. If I'm reading I might decide I want to read a history book. And I get to a certain point and I think, well, I don't get this at all, and so I just give it up. But one particular area of my life, for years, ever since I was 4 years old, I played the piano relatively indifferently. I'd make no great claims for it, but I played the piano, okay? And I play classical music, and I enjoy playing classical music. And as Tim will tell you, because he knows me well, I have thousands, or hundreds of pieces of sheet music, of pieces of classical music that I have bought, and I can play the first 5 bars of most of it, and that's about it, okay? Because I start and then I hit a difficult passage and I abandon it, and I think, well, I can't do that, okay? And it was starting really to get at me. And my sponsor during this session, he said, let's just have a look at that little problem, and let's just do a little exercise. He said, do it for me to humour me. He said, what about if you name the piece, I don't care what it is, he said, but what about you choose a piece and you learn it from beginning to end and you play it to me? In a couple of weeks' time. How about that? Should we try that? And so I sort of conceded that I might possibly be able to do that. And I took a relatively straightforward piece, which was within my ability, and I sat down and I learned the bloody thing from beginning to end. From beginning to end. And 2 weeks later he came along and I played it to him. And lo and behold, he actually got some pleasure out of it, because I didn't play it too badly. I was quite pleased with it. Okay. But there, again, it's an example of a higher power talking to me through somebody else, showing me a way to behave. Okay? Don't just give up on things just because they're a little bit difficult. Crack on with them. And you know, in my work now, at the moment I'm working as an academic lawyer, and I have to read a lot of articles written by terribly clever people, far more eminent and clever than me. And some of them are very difficult, and I'll get sort of 4 or 5 pages in, and I think I have not the slightest clue what this person is talking about. Now, what do? Do I give up, or do I crack on? Because it may be that if I don't understand that point, possibly there's something further on in this learned article that I will understand, and that I will get to grips with, and that I'll be able to use. In other words, abandon the perfectionism. Don't think just because you can't understand every single word, it means that the exercise is completely worthless. Okay? And so that little exercise with my sponsor all those years ago completely changed the way I work. Completely changed it. And that for me was step 6 in a way, in action. It was me sort of keeping my readiness open and opening myself to influences, to good influences, whether they come to me through a sponsor or whether they come to me in prayer or meditation, but opening myself to the influence of goodness. And I put it in that broadest term of God, which may express himself in any good way. Okay? And for me, that does feel like step 6 in action. Okay? And step 7 is a way of opening the channel, isn't it? It's the way of opening that channel to God and making myself open to these influences which will bring about the change in my behaviour. So that's how I understand my role in step 6 and 7. And I wanted to share that with you because I'm very grateful to the man who sponsored me all those years ago, John F., who in Bristol, who really helped me with those steps. And I don't know if that has touched any of you or made any sense, but I hope it has, and that's really all I propose to say.
Is it me?
Yeah.
Yes, hi, my name's Anthony. I'm an alcoholic.
Anthony.
Thanks so much, James, for setting the stage so well around change. And I just have a couple of very short things to say. So, the first thing is that when I first read this topic, I was sort of flummoxed. Because undoubtedly I've changed. You know, I'm not a crazy alcoholic who lives with my retired parents in their retirement village and you know, an inveterate liar and things like that anymore. But how that change has taken place, I'm not certain. I'm not certain I don't know what to say about change. Change is something that occurs almost while I'm not looking at it. But I think in general the thing I do want to say is actually I think the truth is there's two different types of change, and James alluded to them in the end of his talk. One is direct change and one is indirect. The direct is a sort of change whereby when I'm doing a fifth step with one of my sponsees, we might have a list of defects of character. And then what I'll often have them do is write a list of the exact opposites of those things. And then we might maybe choose one or two of those opposites. So if they're rude to waiters, the opposite might be kind to waiters. So we might work on that for a few weeks. We'll talk and say, how are you going with waiters? You're being kind. Or if they're a liar, we might work on being honest. So I do think you can get a certain amount of headway into change by making that sort of cognitive behavioural adjustment to your behaviour. So another good example of that is when I drink, I go crazy and take my clothes off. So I'm going to not drink. And that's an example of a kind of direct change that I can affect and thereby not taking my clothes off. But I think most importantly, and the reason why this topic flummoxed me a little bit, is that I think most of the change that is really enduring and very important in our sobriety is indirect change. And that's the change that comes about through me just forgetting about change altogether. And I'll tell a little story to illustrate this and then stop. When I was a few weeks sober, my sponsor took me to a meeting where there was a sign on the table that said, "Sharers are carers, swearers are not." And what you need to know about me is that when I first got sober, every second word began with the letter F. And I was incensed by this sign. And I called my sponsor over at the end of the meeting and I said, "Listen, look, I have to tell you that I'm going to take that sign and shove it down the secretary's throat." I was serious. She was this woman anyway. And he said, "That's terrific. Can you just stack those chairs over there at the end of the meeting?" I was like, "No, you don't understand. I'm going to take the sign and follow her out into the car park and stick this down her throat." He was like, "Yeah, great. Can you stack those chairs, please, for a moment?" And eventually I got so bored with him that to spite him, to show him I was, a good AA, I went and stacked the chairs. By the time I'd finished stacking the chairs, I'd forgotten all about the sign and the secretary and stuffing it down her throat. And what that proves to me is that I think real change occurs far more beautifully and gracefully than the sort of change where we just practice being nice to waiters. And generally, the reason why I can't say much about change, even though I've now spoken for 6 minutes, is that change is really none of my business. What is my business are the actions of Alcoholics Anonymous. If I want to change, then the best thing I can do is to forget about change. Focus on the actions of Alcoholics Anonymous, and we'll see what happens. I'll leave it at that.
Thanks.
Hi everybody, Bill, alcoholic.
Hi, Bill.
So a lot of new people in here and some people with some time. So two short perspectives. When I came in here, I needed to be changed. And I thought in the beginning that I was the one supposed to do the changing. And to a degree, I was the one who was responsible for my recovery. I was the one who was responsible to take the actions that were indicated by others, not just this crazy little head, to change. So as I surrendered to that process, I took some designated actions like in the big book, it says, people around me noticed the change in me before I did. I used to recognize that. People would tell me that, show me that passage in the book. And once I started to get it, then my ego grabbed onto this again. So now I want to go back into my home unit where they're finally letting me in, and I'm going to shine up my halo and stick it in their face to show them how I've changed. I had an uncle who came up to me at one of the family gatherings and said, "You've been in treatment so many times, here you are trying to show off like you've changed." And he poked his finger at me and says, "You are never going to change. Just wait." Some months later, at a family reunion, I walk up to him, because I've been mulling on this for a long time. See, I'm an alcoholic who hasn't been changed. I'm hanging around sober, but I haven't been changed. And I walk up to him, and I'm going to shine my halo, and I'm sticking it in everybody's face again. And I walk up to him, and I'm poking him in the chest. "Listen, MFer, you dip, 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 dip," like, and I got him up against the wall. And he's just grinning at me, saying, "See, you haven't changed." And all of a sudden, I became hyper aware of what a butthead I was. And so I backed down. So now I go back into this process of change, and I resubmit, which is a change. I think the biggest first set of changes that I can do comes across like in a set-aside prayer. The simplest form of a set-aside prayer that I've ever learned was, "God, please set aside within me what I think I know, so I can be open to a new experience." I needed a new experience, because every time I tried to shine up my old ideals and make them look pretty, they were the old ideals, and the shine would wear off, and off I'd go again. So that's one piece. Later on in recovery, that set-aside prayer kind of mentality takes on some different meanings. I used to think that I got the words in this book, and I got the power behind me, and I'm going to go change everybody, right? This AA isn't doing it right, and I'm going to thump them with this book or with these words and do this and do that. That didn't work well for me. I needed to change. My attitude needed to be adjusted. So what did I do? First, I became willing to change. I saw a problem, and I became willing to be part of a solution to a problem I didn't know the solution to, and I asked for help. That's a big change, asking. As time has gone on, love and tolerance of others has become my code. I will leave the rough riding, big book thumping now to other people. And what I will do is to ask God what direction I should go in each instance. That is a huge change for a guy like me. 2 hours? Okay. That is the biggest change that I can see now in later sobriety, is I gotta be willing to give up my way. See, when I'm early, I got my way about this and my way about that and about survival. What I don't see is some of those character defects actually kind of morph, walk along a spiritual path, put on some spiritual cloak, and whisper junk. And I think this came from God. It's intuition. I need to act and react, and I gotta go, you know, rather than pause. I also used to think that agitated or doubtful, what we talked about in our 10th step, I could understand what agitated was. I'm mad, right? Or I'm irritated. Sometimes agitated can come in the form of a spiritual experience. I can become positively agitated, and that is cool. That's when I know I'm more of a part of change than trying to be an implement of change. So when I'm a part of being changed, and I'm a part of helping to change someone else's life, not for fame or fortune or any hooks. Oh man, I am overpaid. I'm blessed beyond measure. And I want to thank all of you here, because I feel blessed beyond measure with this forum and this format. I feel blessed beyond measure to be invited to be maybe, possibly, an element of change. When God's power flows through me and I'm very clear it's not of me, whew, look out. Thanks. Hi, Corrina.
And I thank the panel for their shares. I've just been having such a beautiful experience listening to everybody's perspective and experience. A lot of tears and a lot of healing from inside, so I'm very grateful. Change. And I was under the delusion that I had the power to change myself. And that kept me in bondage for a little while. But my first wash through my understanding of step 6 wasn't really too good, and I fell back into untreated alcoholism for almost 6 years in recovery. I was going to contemporary meetings and just thinking if I put the drink down, and I had gone through I didn't go through the steps. I went up to steps 9.5. Yes, and I didn't know I had practiced what I had learned, and when I revisited these steps and found the hidden treasures that lie beneath them, my life started to be transformed as a result of it. My understanding of step 6 today is deep and meaningful. It's about allowing God, to submitting my spirit to God and allowing God it's recommitting again to allow God to discipline me in ways that I don't have the power to change myself. And so it's not an academic exercise. The first time around, after having laid out, the manifestations of self, my what defeated me, my selfishness, dishonest, fearful ways. Yeah, sure, academically, who wouldn't want to get rid of these? I'm ready. But the textbook is asking us, are we spiritually ready? And that's really, again, just going back to laying myself on the altar, getting this heart surgery, and allowing God to enter. If I was to describe what 6 and 7 look like to me in my life, it's collaborating, collaborating with the power of the universe. So in 6, I'm painfully aware of my weakness, which is beautiful because then I can connect that to 7, where I allow God to give me the strength. So it's in my weakness I become strong. If I continue to obey the Holy Spirit, and that's who my higher power is. And I shared about step 7, asking for all of me, the good and the bad. And in 2004, I lost my leg in a motorcycle accident, and I now have a prosthetic, so I'm a below-the-knee amputee. And I like to use illustrations because I can see better. When I look in the mirror at my physical being, I only have the half a leg on the left side. And looking at it from that perspective, and when it first happened to me, I didn't want that. I was rejecting a part of myself. I wanted to be whole. And I've learned over the years to love my residual leg, the other piece that is left, in that I'm accepting all of me and what I consider bad, because it's only through my limited vision that I can see. I have a veil over my eyes. God doesn't see me that way. And so I've learned to press in, and instead of trying to fix what's wrong with the outside of me, I'm more, living this interior life, adjusting and allowing God to make provision to adjust my attitude, my perceptions on who He is, who I am, and who I am in relation to you. And so I make it my first piece of spiritual business when I am acting in such a way that I would not want to be treated. And that's really the measure of who I want to be in God's eyes, not so much on the opinion of my fellows. To me, it's all about what God's how am I in right standing with God? Because when I'm not, I don't feel that it hurts me. And the reason that it does is because I love him so much, because he loves me so much first. And I realize how much I've been forgiven. And with that knowledge, it allows me to press in and submit my spirit to that which is not of God. And so I'm allowing him to change me in ways that sometimes I don't want to change. They still have value, or at least I think they have value. And so I think one of the illustrations that I'd like to share how God changed me, and sometimes we don't even know, or I didn't know. I had that thing with my sister, and this is going back some years ago, and we were both in our corners. We just weren't talking. It was whatever. We weren't bad with each other, but we tried to avoid one another. We went to family functions and just pretty much talked to other people in the room, but it was just nothing, only we knew what was going on, except God knew too. And I hadn't been asking God at that time to see what was wrong with me. I was okay with what was going on. I felt like I don't want to go back in and work anymore on this particular issue. It's just too painful. So I was kind of in a resting spot, if you will. And she was nannying my nephew, and I brought Paul's nephew. I actually called my brother. I bypassed her, called my brother and asked if I could take the two nephews in their home to have a date. And when my sister answered the door, she was taken aback and pretty much was almost like, not now. I said, I called the owners. Like, that was my attitude. Like, I'm coming in, I don't need you, that type of stuff. And she blew up. She couldn't control her emotions. And the short end of that is that she felt bad. She stayed in the house. She was terrible to my sister-in-law, Paul's sister-in-law, the nephew's mom. And that particular day, my mom had come to my house to have a visit. And basically, I told my mother what went on. And my mother had to talk with my sister or whatever, and I got my way, if you will. But what God did with me and the way he was able to change me, or my heart, was I got convicted. That evening when I did my nightly review, there was X's all over the place. I wasn't kind and loving, I was selfish, I was in fear, it was full on the feeling of rejection with my sister. And this is how all of my defects of character just kind of spidered out, and that was what was the outcome. But what came to me was I had no right to involve my mother in mine and my sister's battle, and that was causing pain to a mother. Every mother wants their children to get along, and that really catapulted me into wanting to change, the willingness, having that willingness. And I began to work on, with God, cooperating. In other words, God, in the morning, I see that I'm misbehaving this way. I'm causing these things in my family that pain and hurt and separation and exclusion, and God doesn't want that. And so, with God, slowly over time, every morning I would say to him, please help me not to be judgmental. Help me to be kind and loving. And over time I was able to do that. And over time I was able to not include my mother in mine and my sister's. Now there's not any of that. And I try and I make a better effort to not withhold love, to include my sister, to ask God to continually keep my heart in a place of love. And that's really, that's God's job. I mean, that's what we're talking about. In 6, I acknowledge the weakness, and in 7, I understand that God has the power. I mean, in the textbook, it talks about, we can't will these things or wish these things away more than we could alcohol. And so I think as God continues to keep me, I realize more and more my need for God. And I humbly and happily submit my spirit to that. And because of that, there are more chunks of joy, and I feel as though my character is developing more into the characteristics of my God, which is really the aim. Thank you.
Hi family, my name is Paul D. I'm a recovered alcoholic.
Hi, Paul.
And I don't want to let my friend Taylor down, so I'm going to come in sideways. I'm not going to share about 6 and 7. You know, in step 2, we agnostics. Talks about the distinction between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic. It says if that be the case, you may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer. And then if we slide to the back of the book and we read about a spiritual experience, it says that it is a personality change sufficient to bring about recovery. And then on the same page it says he finally realizes that he has undergone a profound alteration in his reaction to life, which is a change. So I was told when I got here that I only had to change one thing if I wanted to remain sober, and that was everything. And experience has shown me that that was the truth, because the person I was will drink today. That person needed to die. Alcoholics Anonymous is about death, the death of self. I needed self to die so that a new me could be reborn. Step 3, it says we were reborn. And for that to happen, it had to be created as a death of self, because that person that I was will drink. And that is done through this process. Talks about it, I think it's on page 25, about the things which this process requires for its successful consummation. And my experience has been that if I follow the directions in this book, there is no way in the world that my personality will not change. A little bit on 6 and 7, they're in a chapter called Into Action, and thank all of you for your experiences. And my experience was when I got to 6 and 7, first off, somebody touched on it. I tried making amends like 3 weeks after I got to AA, and that didn't go really good. You know, I had no idea what an amends was. I thought an amends was an apology. And if you really look up the word amends, my second thought was it meant I had to fix things. And that's not an amends, that is to mend. To amend is to change. So I had no right going to try to make an amends until I had changed. That's why step 9 is after step 7, 6 and 7. Because if I went to you and said, I'm sorry I stole that money, and I give you back the money, but next week, the same person goes and steals money from someone else, I did not make an amends. I made an apology, because I have still not changed. So I followed the directions all the way up to 6 and 7, and they're in a chapter called Into Action. And the action that I need to take to show God that I am entirely ready to have the defect removed. I love what the book says. We have emphasized willingness as being indispensable. Are we now ready to let God remove us all the things which we have admitted are objectionable? So the first thing is I have to admit that these things are objectionable, or I will not change them. If I think lying and cheating and stealing are not objectionable, that they're doing for me what I need them to do, I am not going to be willing to change them. And I need to do the change. God will give me that power. I don't cause the change, but I need to practice the opposite, like was spoken before me. God will do for me what I cannot do for myself. I can practice honesty to the best of my ability. I'm dishonest. I am selfish. I can practice being a selfless human being to the best of my ability. And my experience has been that when I start to practice the opposite of my defects, God will remove the defect if I ask Him to. I say the 7-step prayer, and at the end of the prayer, it says, give me strength as I want from you to do your bidding. Amen. And the next sentence in our book says, we have then completed step 7. So there's no work. I love people say I'm working on step 7. I don't know how. What are you doing? Are you playing God? I don't know. God's going to remove the defect. Step 6, I had a lot of work to do. Step 7 is a prayer. And I asked him to remove everything, good and bad, because what feels good is not always good. And what feels bad is not always bad. God has used my defects many times to move me to a place where he needed me to be. And it's way too long of a story, but one of those defects brought me to a meeting which introduced me to a woman who I got to sponsor, whose sister noticed that she changed, and I ended up sponsoring the sister for a while, and then we got engaged and we got married. That was my defect that brought me to that meeting, because it was a meeting with a picture with a lot of women at the meeting, so it was the only reason I went. So my defect, God used to bring me to that place. So I got to remember, God's going to do the changing, but it's my job to take the actions necessary. Thanks for having me.
Thank you to all our speakers. We will now address the floor for a Q&A session. We don't have any questions submitted. Anybody have any questions on the topic?
Jim Al-Anon.
Hey, Jim.
Maybe I zoned a little bit, but Bill, could you, I wrote a couple of, you said you wanted to be a part of change and not to be the change. Can you say that again? Like, what bringing that spirit about being entirely willing? I know we were talking about that when you said, but I lost something when you said that.
Well, I think as long as I recognize that I'm not the changer, I can and will be, on a good day, an agent for God. I can be an agent for change. But I'm not the cause or the cure. On a good day, I can be an agent.
A breadcrumb in the trail.
It's also, if I was just going to add on to that too, it's the spirit of the prayer of St. Francis, right? The 11th step prayer, the 12 and 12, make me a channel of your peace. Make me a channel. Yeah.
Question. One of the top 5 things that sponsees tell me about is they'll say, I'm full of resentment or I'm full of fear. And it turns out they've been thinking resentful thoughts all day and they've been thinking fearful thoughts all day, that they don't like feeling resentful and fearful as a result of thinking resentful and fearful thoughts. And I talk to my sponsees about the degree to which you're responsible for your own thought life. And I'd love to hear what any of you have to say about responsibility for your own thought life.
Before I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, I was always being captive of my thoughts. And even almost 6 years in, I was, because I didn't understand the nuts and bolts of our program and how to practically apply the steps in my life, in my heart, and I suffered for it. I'd have a thought and then I would just keep building on it. I would get a half-truth, and before I knew it, I was writing an epic novel about something that wasn't even real. And those things tortured me. And I was left with the influence of the enemy, my lower power. And it was a battle between my ears. And I couldn't break free of it. And I suffered, through God's grace. I didn't pick up a drink, but I picked up a man. I treated my alcoholism with an obsession with a guy in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I also had a really bad stealing habit. And that's where my thoughts took me. When I was stealing, I was more thinking about the methodical way of how, which way I can get to the store and get the stuff in my bag. And the same thing when I was with the guy. Obsessive compulsive thinking led me to those behaviors. So after I came to the end of myself and I got leveled at 6 years in Alcoholics Anonymous, I was homeless. I was asked to leave my dwelling place. I got into a motorcycle accident. I lost my leg. My entire life was in an alphabetical folder file. I had my birth certificate, I had my baptismal, my divorce paper, and my social security card. And these were the things that told me who I was. And I didn't even have a prosthetic. I was getting around on crutches. My family disowned me. And that's where my thinking got me, when I'm held captive by my thoughts. And that catapulted me for actually, I think that God leveled the mountain and made it into a road that I, was able to be led down towards Him. I often talk about, do you want cheaper or do you want deeper? And, I want deeper. And this is why it's very important for me to practice step 11. We start out in 3, and that's the beginning portions of the submission and the allowing God to change us. Then we recommit in 7, recommit in 11, and we start to bring that out into the world and keep doing that, and it becomes a manifold for our life. And by doing those things, I'm able to, when there is a negative thought, take it captive and put a prayer in between it. So the way that I would shorten what I just said would be, I have a negative thought. In between that negative thought and the action is God. Because if I don't have that, I'm going on the whole train ride and I'm going to end up homeless. And that's really where I go. And so I've learned to discipline my thoughts. I can, I'm in charge of what's going on here. And I choose to align my thought process with God's. And that's what we call aligning our will with God's will. Thank you.
Thanks. I have family, Paul, Al-Anon. My personal experience, when I first started practicing this way of life, I was told that this is all about practices and disciplines. And the only way, in the book, what it said is us alcoholics are an undisciplined lot. So we let God discipline us in the way we just outlined. And experiencing in early recovery, I used to get up in the morning, run to the bathroom, cup of coffee, get dressed, and on the way to work, I would pray in the car. And I've come to understand that that's not going to work for a guy like me. The directions state, upon awakening, consider your plans for the day, but before you begin, ask God to direct your thinking. So since I practiced my wife and I together, when we wake up, but before I was with her, when I woke up, the first thing I would do every day, first thank God for waking me, because the alarm didn't wake me, because many people didn't wake up this morning when their alarm clock went off. God allowed me to wake up. And the next thing I do is ask Him to direct my thinking, because between the walk to the bedroom, to the bathroom, I probably want to kill 6 people, because I know what's going on today, because I already have my plans for the day. And what happens, when I've learned, is that when I ask God first to direct my thinking, it changes my entire outlook of the day, and then the rest of the day belongs to God. And whatever plans I've made, if they happen, they happen, but if they don't, I'm not in the results business. I am here to do His bidding. And with that, my thought process is still there, but it's more or less waiting for Him to show me which way to go. Thank you.
So I'm James, an alcoholic. Yes, the fact is that still, after however many years of recovery, unbidden thoughts come into my head, unbidden fears come into my head, and resentments, and into the heads of my sponsees, and when that happens, it doesn't particularly profit me to wonder why they have. They just have. You just accept it. It's just a fact. They're just there. It's like when the obsession to drink comes upon you. The solution is not to work out why the obsession to drink has come upon you. The solution is to do something. And for me, when and it's normally fear in my case, and sometimes I can be overwhelmed by self-regarding fear. And when that happens, I have the tools, because the tools are provided to me by the Big Book, and that is to do something for somebody else. And Anthony sort of answered the question in the way I would answer it, in the anecdote he told about shoving the notice down the woman's throat, because his sponsor's advice was very sound advice: do something for somebody else. Stop thinking about that and do something for somebody else. And if I do that, then by the time I finish doing something for somebody else, very often the thought is gone. It'll come back at some point, I expect, but that's fine, because I've sort of got a solution to it. So I think the important thing is not to worry too much when you're in it. And for me, I sort of picked up on what Paul just said then. If I've got an overwhelming fear upon me, meditating or some sort of spiritual solitary practice is utterly useless for me. Simply because I can't do it. I can't do it. I try and if I got this sort of overwhelming fear about something that's something that's coming up in my life, then I cannot meditate. I just can't do it. But there are things I can do, which is pick up the phone to somebody else, go and do something for somebody else. I can do that because that's a sort of mechanical thing, and as soon as I start talking to somebody else, then I stop thinking about myself, at least for a short time. And that's the relief that I get, and that's the tool that's been given me, really. So I think that's the advice that I would give to a sponsee who said that.
I think just very quickly to use a brief story to illustrate that point, which I think is really important. An extreme example of fear and resentment and that obsessional thinking that goes around the fear and resentment is a panic attack. So I think that's the natural end to that type of spinning out. And I used to take a lot of horrific panic attacks very early in sobriety. And where the walls would move and the ceiling would move, really horrific. And really, if you slow the panic attack down, it would just be fear, resentment, fear, resentment, fear, resentment, fear, that had just been allowed to spin out of control. And I used to call my sponsor and say to him, I'm having a panic attack, what are you going to do about it? And he used to say to me, I was living with my parents in their retirement home at that time. And he used to say to me, I want you to go and make your mother a cup of tea. And I used to say to him, no. My mother is not having the panic attack, I am. So, he said, I want you to go and make your mother a cup of tea. And I would often sack him and then hang up. And then to show him I was a bigger person than that, I would go and make my mother a cup of tea. And what I discovered is, about halfway through the process of making the cup of tea, the panic attack, the panicked thinking, fear, resentment, would subside. And the reason for that is, as long as I'm thinking about how she takes her tea, whether she takes it with milk or without milk, with sugar or without sugar, weak or strong, my attention is off myself for long enough for the grace of God to sneak in the back door and restore me to sanity. So I think the answer to that question is an action. Any action that doesn't involve me is a good thing.
Thanks.
I'm Bill Alcock. So as I take guys through the process, one of the things that I'll do with them is I'll say, show me the chapter in the book that's called Into Thinking. And most of us are prone to be overthinkers and overanalyzers, and got to figure this out. And it's like, step 10, I'm agitated, I'm doubtful, I'm going to learn to watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear in me, not in me. And when they crop up, because they're coming, right, they do, what am I going to do about it? It gives us very specific direction. If you don't know what in fact, I'm not even going to say it. There are 4 things to do when you're agitated or doubtful or in selfishness or fear. Look them up in the big book. It's that blue book that many of us carry. Get one, look it up. In step 10, there are 4 things to watch for when I'm in the watch mode, and then there's 4 pieces of action. And it is action that I need to take to interrupt this process of me living in fear and judging and living in fear and judging and reacting. I need to pause because that is agitated and doubtful. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you again to our speakers and to everyone who's made this workshop possible. So let's